The wind that scoured the eastern edge of the Navajo lands in the year 1884 did not merely blow, it sanded the soul. It carried the alkali dust of the high desert, a fine gray powder that settled into the deep creases of a man's face and the intricate gears of a Winchester rifle alike. Here, at the Red Mesa trading post, civilization was a concept as thin as the paper on which the politicians in Washington wrote their treaties. It was a place where the red rock walls rose like the bloody bones of the earth, and the silence was heavy enough to crush a man who did not know how to carry it. Kai Yazzie knew how to carry silence. He wore it like the faded denim coat that hung loosely over his broad shoulders. At 30 years of age, he moved with the liquid grace of a mountain lion, his boots making no sound on the rough wooden floorboards of the trading post. He was a man caught between two dying worlds. He had scouted for the army for 3 seasons, wearing their blue wool and tracking his own people because he had believed, with the foolish hope of youth, that cooperation would buy safety. He had been wrong. Now, he tracked only mule deer and elk, trading their hides for flour, coffee, and the silence he craved. He placed a bundle of curing hides on the counter. Mrs. Lark, a woman whose skin had been leathered by 20 years of Arizona sun, looked up from her ledger. She adjusted her spectacles and nodded. She did not ask him where he had been. In this territory, asking a man his business was a quick way to invite trouble. "Good skins, Kai," Mrs. Lark said. Her voice was rasping, like dry leaves skittering over stone. "The coffee has gone up. $2 a sack now." Kai did not flinch at the price. He simply nodded. "And the salt?" "Same as last week," she replied. She began to tally the trade in her book, the scratch of her pen loud in the quiet room. Kai leaned back against the counter, his dark eyes scanning the room. He saw everything, though he looked at nothing in particular. He saw the nervous sweat on the brow of a young private from the nearby outpost. He saw the weary slump of Hatali Benali, the old singer who sat in the corner nursing a cup of tepid water. Benali was a man of peace, a healer who believed that the beauty of the world could be sung back into existence. Kai envied him that faith, but he could not share it. Kai had seen too much blood soak into the thirsty sand to believe a song could wash it clean. The door to the post swung open, banging against the wall with a violence that made the young private jump. The dust swirled in, followed by 2 men who sucked the air out of the room. Silas Crow walked in first. He was a large man, 45 years of age, with a belly that spoke of beefsteaks and whiskey, and eyes that spoke of acquiring things. He owned the largest cattle operation south of the San Juan River, and his ambition was to drive his herd straight through the heart of the dying grazing lands to the railhead in the north. Behind him walked Deputy Marshal Clay Reddick. If Crow was the hammer, Reddick was the nail. He was 40, lean and hard, with a face that looked as if it had been carved from granite by a dull chisel. He wore the tin star on his chest not as a symbol of justice, but as a license. He was the law in this corner of the territory, which meant the law was whatever Silas Crow paid for it to be. Kai turned his gaze back to the counter, making himself small, making himself invisible. It was a trick he had learned in the army. If you were not seen, you could not be targeted. "Mrs. Lark," Crow boomed, his voice too loud for the small space. "I trust the mail wagon is on schedule. I have documents coming from Santa Fe regarding the new grazing rights. Due in tomorrow by noon. Mr. Crow," she answered, her tone polite but guarded. "Provided the axle holds up through the canyon." Reddick leaned against the door frame, his hand resting casually near the butt of his Colt revolver. He looked at Kai with open contempt. "You still letting strays loiter in here?" Lark misses. Lark did not look up from her ledger. "Kai is a customer. Deputy. His money is as good as yours. Better. In fact, since he actually pays it." Reddick's jaw tightened, but Crow laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Let the boy be. Clay, we have bigger concerns than a lone buck selling rabbit skins." Kai took his supplies, a sack of flour, a tin of coffee, a bag of salt, and moved toward the door. As he passed Reddick, the deputy marshal shifted his weight, blocking the path. It was a childish game of dominance. Kai stopped. He did not look Reddick in the eye. That would be a challenge. He looked at the man's chest, at the star that was pinned slightly crooked. "Excuse me," Kai said softly. Reddick smirked. "You watch your step out there. Scout, I hear the mood is turning ugly. Some of your people are getting restless about the new fences. Would be a shame if someone got hurt." "I am not my people," Kai said, his voice flat. "I am just one man. There is no such thing," Reddick spat. Finally stepping aside, Kai stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun, the heat hitting him like a physical blow. He walked to his horse, a sturdy roan mare tied to the rail, and secured his supplies. He felt the old wound in his spirit tearing open again. He wanted to be neutral. He wanted to stand apart, but men like Reddick did not see a man. They saw a target. As he tightened the cinch, a flash of light caught his eye. It was not the glint of a rifle barrel, but something glass and strange. He turned to see a woman standing near the corral, wrestling with a wooden tripod and a large box camera. This was Clara Hart. She looked entirely out of place, like a porcelain teacup resting on a jagged rock. She wore a high-collared dress of blue cotton that was already stained with dust at the hem, and a straw hat that did little to shield her pale face from the relentless sun. She was 24 years old, though her eyes held a determination that suggested she had read about the world in books and believed she understood it. She was cursing softly under her breath as one of the tripod legs slipped in the loose sand. Kai watched her for a moment. He should have mounted his horse and ridden away. He should have vanished into the sagebrush. But something about her struggle, the futile battle of order against the chaos of the desert, made him pause. He walked over. Without a word, he kicked a flat stone under the slipping leg of the tripod, stabilizing it. Clara looked up, startled. Her eyes were green, the color of the pine needles in the high mountains, and wide with surprise. "Oh, thank you." "The sand moves," Kai said. "You must build a foundation first." Clara straightened her hat, brushing a stray lock of chestnut hair from her forehead. She looked at him, really looked at him, not with the fear or contempt he was used to, but with curiosity. "I am trying to capture the light on the mesa before the sun goes down. The contrast is extraordinary. The light changes fast," Kai warned, "and the shadows are colder than you think." "I am Clara Hart," she said, extending a hand. It was an absurd gesture out here, formal and civilized. Kai looked at her hand but did not take it. He nodded once. "Kai Yazi. You are the guide, Mrs.? Lark mentioned the one who knows the trails." "I know the land," he corrected. "I do not guide anymore." "That is a pity," Clara said, withdrawing her hand but maintaining her gaze. "I am here on a grant from a foundation in St. Louis. I intend to document the conditions here, the integration of the cultures. I believe that if people back east could see the truth captured in photographs and detailed reports, they would understand that violence is not the answer. Education and law are the answer." Kai felt a bitter laugh rise in his throat, but he swallowed it. "Paper does not stop a bullet, Miss Hart." "It can change the hand that fires it," she argued, her chin lifting stubbornly. "I have letters of introduction. I have the protection of the law. The law here belongs to the man who buys the bullets," Kai said. He swung up onto his horse. He looked down at her one last time. "Go back to St. Louis. Miss Hart, this land does not care about your camera or your good intentions. It will eat you whole." He turned the mare and rode toward the canyon, leaving her standing there with her box of glass plates and her fragile hope. Inside the trading post, the air had grown thick. The young Lieutenant Mason had arrived from the outpost, looking harried. He was speaking in low tones with Mrs. Lark, who looked troubled. Clara Hart entered, dusting the sand from her skirts. She needed to reload her film holders in the dark room. Mrs. Lark allowed her to use a small, windowless storage closet at the back of the building. She nodded to the lieutenant and Mrs. Lark, sensing the tension but attributing it to the heat and the harsh landscape. She made her way to the back, slipping into the narrow storage room. It smelled of dry corn and stale tobacco. She lit the small red safety lantern and began the delicate process of preparing her plates. The darkness was comforting. A small private world where she could organize her thoughts. She thought of the Navajo man, Kai. His eyes had been so guarded, yet he had helped her. His warning lingered in her mind. The law here belongs to the man who buys the bullets. She shook her head. He was cynical, hardened by a hard life. She would prove him wrong. She would prove that truth, documented and verified, had power. Voices drifted through the thin wooden wall separating the storage room from the private office where Silas Crow and Deputy Marshal Reddick had retired with a bottle of whiskey. The wood was warped and dry, carrying sound with treacherous clarity. "It has to be tomorrow." Crow's voice was a low rumble. "The mail wagon is the only target that will make the newspapers in Denver." "I have the boys ready," Reddick replied. His voice was sharper, edged with the metallic twang of excitement. "We will hit them at the Box Canyon, just past the Twisted Cedar. It is a perfect choke point." Clara froze, her hand hovering over a glass plate. "Make sure it looks real." "Clay," Crow warned. "I want arrows. I want scalping. I want a scene that screams savage brutality. If the army thinks it is just bandits, they will send a posse. If they think it is a Navajo uprising, they will send the cavalry to clear the entire sector. And once they are moved to the reservation, that water right is mine." "Do not worry," Reddick chuckled. A dry, dusty sound. "I have a few blankets and moccasins we took off that dead buck last winter. We will leave enough evidence to hang every Indian from here to the Rio Grande." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was not just corruption. This was a massacre in the making, a manufactured war. "What about the passengers?" Reddick asked. "The driver is Old Man Miller, and there is talk of a passenger." "No witnesses," Crow said. The words dropped like stones. "Kill them all. Burn the wagon. We cannot have anyone contradicting the story." Clara's hand trembled. She knocked against a shelf, sending a small tin of percussion caps clattering to the floor. The sound was not loud, but in the sudden silence of the other room, it sounded like a gunshot. "What was that?" Reddick's voice snapped. "Rats," Crow suggested. "This place is infested." "Rats do not knock over tins," Reddick said. "Wait here." Clara heard the heavy scrape of a chair and the thud of boots coming toward the door. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She looked around the small room. There was no other exit. She blew out the red lantern, plunging the room into absolute darkness, and squeezed herself into the narrow gap behind a stack of wool blankets. The door creaked open. Light from the office spilled in, a yellow wedge cutting through the dust. Reddick stood in the doorway, his silhouette menacing. He held his revolver in his hand. "Anyone in here?" he growled. Clara pressed her hand over her mouth, biting her lip until she tasted copper. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying to a god she hoped was listening in this god-forsaken country. Reddick took a step inside. His boots crunched on the dirt floor. He paused, listening. Clara held her breath until her lungs burned. "Just rats. Clay!" Crow called from the office. "Come back and pour a drink." "We have planning to do." Reddick stood for one moment longer, his gaze sweeping the shadows. Then he grunted, holstered his gun, and backed out. The door clicked shut. Clara slumped against the wall, her body trembling violently. She was alive, but for how long? She knew too much. She had heard the mechanism of the trap. She waited for an hour, terrified to move, until she heard the front door of the trading post slam and the sound of horses galloping away. Only then did she dare to creep out. She found Mrs. Lark wiping down the counter, her face pale. The store was empty. "Mrs. Lark," Clara whispered, her voice shaking. "I need to send a telegram. Immediately. Mrs." Lark shook her head sadly. "The line is down. Child. Storm took it out 3 miles east. Won't be fixed for a week." Clara gripped her notebook, her knuckles white. "Then I need to get to the fort. I need to speak to Colonel Harris. The colonel is in Santa Fe, Mrs. Lark said gently. Only Lieutenant Mason is at the outpost, and he is a good boy, but he does not have the authority to move troops without orders. Clara felt the walls closing in. She was alone. Her belief in the system was crumbling brick by brick. She looked down at her notebook, where she had blindly scribbled the words, Box Canyon, tomorrow. No witnesses. She had to warn the wagon, but who would believe her? She was an outsider, a woman from the east with a camera and a head full of dreams. Crow owned the town. Reddick was the law. She thought of the man outside, the scout, Kai Yazi. Paper does not stop a bullet. He had warned her, and he was the only one who knew the land well enough to bypass the road. Mrs. Lark, Clara asked, trying to steady her voice. Where does Kai Yazi camp, Mrs.? Lark looked at her sharply. He camps where the wind dies. Child, he does not like to be found. I have to find him, Clara said, the desperation rising in her throat. Please, Mrs. Lark studied her for a long moment, seeing the fear in her eyes, but also the steel. She sighed and reached under the counter, pulling out a small, rough-drawn map on a piece of hide. He stays near the Twin Spires, up in the canyon wash, about 4 miles ride. But Clara, Mrs. Lark lowered her voice. If you go to him, you are crossing a line. The town will not forgive a white woman who runs to the Navajo. The town is planning a murder, Clara said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I do not care about their forgiveness. She took the map. She did not know that her name had already been spoken in the back room. She did not know that Reddick, suspicious of the noise, had checked the guest register on his way out and seen Clara Hart. St. Louis, written in elegant script. He had told Crow, if she was in that closet, she is a loose end. Clara walked out into the twilight. The sun had set, and the sky was a bruised purple. The wind had picked up, cold and biting. She saddled the horse she had rented, her fingers fumbling with the buckles. She packed her camera. Why? She did not know, perhaps because it was her only shield and her satchel with the notebook. She rode out into the darkening desert, leaving the fragile safety of the trading post behind. She was riding toward a man who wanted nothing to do with her, carrying a secret that could get them both killed. Miles away, at the base of the Twin Spires, Kai Yazi sat by a small, smokeless fire. He was sharpening his skinning knife, the scrape of stone on steel a rhythmic sound in the vast silence. He stopped, his head tilting slightly. He heard the rhythm of hoofbeats carried on the wind, erratic and unskilled. A rider was coming. He extinguished the fire with a handful of sand and moved into the shadows of the rocks. He waited, his hand resting on his rifle. He had hoped for silence, but the desert, it seemed, had other plans. The rider crested the ridge, silhouetted against the rising moon. It was the woman. The teacher. Kai watched her from the darkness. He knew, with the instinct of a man who had survived a dozen ambushes, that she brought trouble. He could have stayed hidden. He could have let her ride past and get lost in the arroyos. But he remembered the way she had looked at him not as a savage, but as a man. And he remembered the way she had tried to stabilize her camera in the shifting sand. He stepped out of the shadows, his voice carrying over the wind. You ride loud enough to wake the dead, Miss Hart. Clara gasped, pulling back on the reins. The horse danced nervously. She looked down at him, her face pale in the moonlight. They are going to attack the mail wagon, she blurted out. No preamble, no pleasantries. Crow and Reddick, tomorrow. They are going to make it look like your people did it. Kai stood very still. The wind whipped his black hair across his face. He looked at her, searching for the lie, but found only terror and a desperate kind of truth. Why tell me? He asked. Because I have no one else, she said, her voice breaking. And because you were right, the law belongs to the bullets. Kai looked at the horizon, where the darkness swallowed the land. He knew that by listening to her, he was stepping back into the war he had tried to leave. He knew that the moment she stepped down from that horse, his solitude was over. Get down, he said, his voice rough. Before you fall down." Clara slid from the saddle, her legs shaking. She stood before him, the distance between them filled with the gravity of what she had just done. She had chosen a side, and, in the distance, back toward the town, the faint, ominous sound of a tracker's whistle cut through the night. Reddick had found her trail. The hunt had begun. The morning sun did not bring warmth. It brought revelation. The Box Canyon, usually a cathedral of red silence, was now a scar of smoking timber and shattered silence. The mail wagon lay on its side like a broken beetle, its wheels spinning lazily in the draft of the canyon floor. The horses were gone, likely cut loose or run off, leaving drag marks in the heavy sand. Kai Yazi sat atop his roan mare on the ridge, looking down. He did not descend immediately. A man who survived the wars by reading the earth did not rush into a grave. He watched the ravens circling, black specks against the hard azure of the Arizona sky. They were the first to know when a heart stopped beating. He nudged the mare forward, picking a path down the shale slope that would leave the least disturbance. When he reached the canyon floor, the smell hit him burnt canvas, frightened horse sweat, and the copper tang of blood. He dismounted and walked the perimeter. To the untrained eye, it was a chaotic scene of savage violence. Arrows jutted from the wood of the wagon, feathered with turkey quills. The ground was churned with tracks, but Kai saw the lies written in the dust. He knelt by a set of footprints near the led horse's trace. They were moccasin tracks. Yes, soft-soled and flat, but the stride was wrong. A Navajo man walked with his weight forward, rolling from the ball of the foot to the heel. A quiet, stalking gait, born of hunting on stone. These tracks struck the ground hard at the heel. The weight was heavy, digging deep into the sand at the back of the step. Kai touched the edge of the print. It was a boot heel wrapped in burlap to soften the shape. But the physics of the stride could not be hidden. White men had walked here, circling the wagon 3 times to create the illusion of a war party. "A performance," Kai whispered to the wind. "For an audience of blind men?" He moved closer to the wreckage. The driver, Old Man Miller, was nowhere to be seen. Likely dragged off to be found later, scalped to complete the tableau. Kai felt a cold knot of anger in his gut. Miller had been a decent man who once gave Kai a ride to the fort when the snow was hip-deep. Then he saw the sign. It was a piece of crate wood, nailed crudely to the side of the wagon that faced the trail. The wood was scorched, the letters burned into the grain with a heated cinch ring or a running iron. The script was jagged and hateful. Navajo lover, the words were not a description. They were a curse. In this territory, to label a white woman a Navajo lover was to strip her of her protection. It was a way to tell the town that she deserved what she got, that she had crossed the line between the civilized and the savage. It was a way to turn a victim into a villain, ensuring that no decent citizen would mourn her too deeply. Kai felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. He remembered Clara Hart's eyes, full of naive determination. "I do not care about their forgiveness," she had said. She had tried to beat them here. She had tried to stop the war with her camera and her notebook. He approached the crushed canopy of the wagon. The canvas was torn and bloody. He lifted a heavy beam, the wood groaning in protest. He expected to find a corpse, broken and silent. He expected to see the light gone from those green eyes. Beneath the wreckage, huddled in a small pocket of space created by the snapped axle in a large trunk, lay Clara Hart. She was not dead. She was curled tight like a child in the womb, her blue dress ripped and stained with grease and dark blood. Her hat was gone, and a gash on her forehead had bled freely, matting her chestnut hair to her cheek. But she was breathing. Her breath came in shallow, terrified gasps. Her hands were locked around a waterproof leather satchel, her knuckles white, her fingers rigid. She held it against her chest as if it were her own beating heart. Kai crouched low. "Miss Hart?" She did not move. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her lips moving in a silent prayer or a plea. "Clara," he said, his voice dropping to the low rumble he used to soothe startled horses. Her eyes snapped open. For a second, there was no recognition, only the feral panic of a trapped animal. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the abrasive rock of the canyon wall, dragging the satchel with her. "No," she croaked, her voice a ruin. "No, I saw you! I saw you!" "It is Kai," he said, holding his hands out, palms open. "Look at me. It is Kai." She blinked, the fog of shock clearing slowly. She focused on his face, on the scar above his lip, on the dark eyes that held no violence. Her shoulders slumped, and a sob broke from her chest. A jagged, tearing sound. They shot the horses first," she whispered, the words tumbling out. "Mister." Miller tried to turn. The wheel shattered. "I saw him. I saw Reddick." "I know," Kai said. He reached out and touched her arm. She was ice cold. "We must move. The men who did this will return." "He was wearing a mask," Clara said, her voice rising in hysteria. "But I saw his boots. I saw the silver on his spurs, the ones with the rowel shaped like a star. I saw him. Kai, he looked right at me before the wagon went over." "He thinks you are dead," Kai said firmly. "That is the only reason you are breathing, but he will come back to be sure. He will come back with the rescue party to discover the tragedy he created. We cannot be here when he does." Clara tried to stand, but her legs gave way. Kai caught her. She was surprisingly light, but her weight was dead weight, heavy with exhaustion. He saw her wince as she put weight on her right ankle. "My bag," she gasped, clutching the leather satchel as he lifted her. "Do not let me lose it." "I have it," Kai said. "What is in there that is worth dying for?" Clara looked at him, her eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "The truth. I went to the trading post office before I rode out. I found the ledger, the real one, not the one Mrs. Lark keeps on the counter." Kai froze. "You stole Silas Crow's ledger?" "I took the pages," she corrected. "The ones that show the payments to the judge, and the payments to Reddick, and the land deeds. He signed them with names of dead men. I have the proof." "Kai." She patted the bag with a trembling hand. "And the plate. I took a photograph. Yesterday, before you came. When they were talking by the corral, I set up the camera to test the light, and they stepped into the frame. I did not have time to develop it, but the glass plate is in here. If it is clear, it shows Reddick handing a bag of money to the magistrate." Kai looked at the fragile woman in his arms. She was not a porcelain teacup. She was iron wrapped in silk. She had walked into the lion's den and stolen the meat from between his teeth. "You have signed your own death warrant," Kai said, but there was no judgment in his voice, only a grim respect. "Then I will read it to them before I die," she said. He carried her to his horse. He did not put her in the saddle. She was too weak to hold on. Instead, he lifted her up and swung up behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist to secure her against his chest. She leaned back into him, shivering violently. He unbuttoned his heavy denim coat and pulled the edges around her, enveloping her in his warmth. "Hold on," he said. "We are leaving the road." "Where?" she asked. "To a place where horses cannot follow easily." He replied, "A place the white man's maps do not show." At the Red Mesa trading post, the mood was one of calculated hysteria. Deputy Marshal Clay Reddick stood on the porch, his face a mask of righteous fury. A crowd of 20 men had gathered ranchers, drifters, and hired hands. They were armed with Winchesters and Colts, their faces hard. "It is an outrage," Reddick shouted, his voice carrying over the wind. "A war party. On a government road, they hit the mail wagon. Old Miller is dead, and the girl, the schoolteacher from St. Louis, she was on that wagon." A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. Silas Crow stood by the door, his face somber, his eyes watchful. He played the part of the concerned citizen perfectly. "We must ride," Reddick commanded. "We must bring justice to these savages. I want every able-bodied man to ride with me. The government pays a bounty for renegades, $50 a head." As the men scrambled for their horses, a small, rat-faced man named Yarley, who often ran messages for Crow, slipped into the trading post. He leaned over the counter where Mrs. Lark was wiping a glass, her hands trembling slightly. "Crow says the reward is special for the girl," Charlie whispered. his breath smelling of chewing tobacco. "If she is found alive, $500. But she has to be brought to him directly. No questions asked." "Mrs.?" Lark dropped the glass. It shattered on the floor. "She is dead, surely," the deputy said. The deputy thinks she might have crawled away. Charlie smirked. "Like a snake. $500. Mrs. Lark, that buys a lot of flour." He tapped the counter and walked out. "Mrs." Lark stared at the broken glass. She knew what $500 meant. It meant retirement. It meant leaving this dust-choked hell. But she also remembered the way Clara Hart had looked at her, terrified and brave. "Mrs." Lark gripped the counter until her knuckles ached. Silence was a currency she had spent her whole life hoarding. But now the price of it had just gone up, high in the labyrinth of the red rocks. Kai Yazi stopped the mare. They were 3 miles from the crash site, deep in a fissure that cut through the sandstone plateau. The walls rose 200 feet on either side, blocking the sun. He helped Clara down. She hissed in pain as her ankle touched the ground. "We stop here for a moment," Kai said. "I need to cover our tracks." "They will see the hoof prints," Clara said, leaning against the stone wall. "They will see tracks that lead to the river." Kai said, "I backed the mare up for a 1/4 of a mile and brushed the sand. They will think we crossed the water. By the time they realize the river is too high to cross there, we will be in the high country." He worked quickly, using a branch of sagebrush to sweep the ground, disturbing the dust in a way that looked like wind, not man. When he finished, he turned to Clara. She was sliding down the wall, her face gray. "The head wound," Kai said. He approached her, his hands gentle. "Let me see." He brushed the hair away from her forehead. The gash was angry and red, but the skull beneath felt intact. "It needs cleaning and stitching." "I have a sewing kit," she murmured, gesturing to her satchel. "In the side pocket." Kai opened the bag. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were the pages she had stolen. He did not read them. He found the small tin with needles and thread. He looked at her. "This will hurt. Do it," she said. She did not close her eyes. As he threaded the needle, Kai looked at her. "Why did you do it? Clara, you could have stayed in St. Louis. You could have stayed at the post. Why steal the ledger? Why put your name in their book of dead?" "Because," Clara said, wincing as the needle pierced her skin. She took a breath, her voice steadying. "Because I came here to teach the children that the law protects them. How can I teach that if I let a murderer write the law, if I stay silent? I am not a teacher. I am an accomplice." Kai paused. Her words cut through his own defenses. He had spent 5 years telling himself that silence was survival. He had told himself that he was a scout, a watcher, not a participant. But here was this woman, with no weapon but a piece of glass and a stolen book, fighting a war he had surrendered. "You are a fool," Kai said softly, tying off the stitch. "But you are a brave fool." "Is that a compliment?" she asked, a faint, pained smile touching her lips. "In this land, it is usually an epithet for a corpse." Kai said. He tore a strip from his own shirt and bandaged her head. Suddenly, Kai stiffened. He stood up, his head cocked to the side. The wind carried sound through the canyon like water through a pipe. "What is it?" Clara asked, sensing the change in him. "Horses," Kai said. "Not the posse. They are still at the river. This is closer. 2 riders, moving fast." He grabbed his rifle. "They found the shortcut. Reddick must have a tracker. Maybe a dine who sold his honor for whiskey." He looked at Clara. The conflict raged in his chest. If he left her here, hidden in the crevice, he could slip away. He could vanish. No one would know he had been here. The girl would be found, and the law would take its course. He would live. He would buy his coffee and his salt and grow old in his silence. But if he stood with her, if he raised his rifle against the men with badges, there was no going back. He would be an outlaw, a renegade, A Navajo lover in the eyes of the white men, and a fool in the eyes of his own people who wanted peace at any cost. Clara looked at him. She saw the calculation in his eyes. She reached out and touched his hand. "Go," she whispered. "Take the ledger. Hide it. Let them find me. If you are caught with me, they will hang you without a trial." She was offering him his life. She was giving him permission to be the coward he had been trying to be. Kai looked at her hand on her skin pale against his copper tone, her fingers bloody but strong. He looked at the Navajo lover brand burned into his mind. He realized then that he could not save his soul by standing outside the fire. He could only save it by walking into the flames. "No," Kai said. He pulled her up, ignoring her cry of pain. "We do not hide anymore. We run and we fight." He lifted her onto the mare. The sound of hooves was louder now, echoing off the canyon walls. He could hear a man's voice, a high, excited laugh. It was the laugh of a hunter who has cornered his prey. "Hold tight," Kai commanded, swinging up behind her. "And do not close your eyes. You need to see the path." He kicked the mare into a gallop, not away from the sound, but up a narrow, terrified goat trail that led straight up the canyon wall. It was a path that only a desperate man would take. A path where one slip meant a fall of 300 feet. Behind them, the first gunshot cracked the air, the bullet whining off the stone inches from the mare's hoof. "There!" a voice shouted from below. "I see them! It is the scout! He has the girl!" Kai did not look back. He leaned forward, urging the horse upward, into the red labyrinth, leaving the world of laws and lies behind. The inciting incident was over. The war had begun. The ascent had been a brutal test of endurance, both for the heaving mare and the two souls clinging to her back. They had ridden until the moon was high and hard, a silver coin nailed to the black velvet of the sky, to throw off the trackers. Kai had forced the horse through an icy, waist-deep channel of the San Juan River where it cut through the canyon narrows, washing away their scent, but soaking them to the bone. Now, safe for the moment in a hidden alcove of rock known only to the oldest hunters, the adrenaline began to bleed away, leaving behind a cold that bit deep into the marrow. The hideout was a shallow cave carved by wind and water into the face of a sandstone cliff. A thin trickle of water wept from the back wall, pooling in a natural basin before disappearing into a crack in the floor. It was a place of ghosts and silence, invisible from the canyon floor 500 feet below. Kai Yazzie moved with the economy of a man who had spent a lifetime conversing with survival. He picketed the mare in a small depression where she could reach a patch of dry scrub grass, then turned his attention to the immediate enemy, the temperature. The desert, so mercilessly hot by day, was a treacherous lover at night, stripping the heat from a body in minutes. He built a fire, not a roaring blaze that would cast a beacon against the canyon walls, but a small, intense heart of heat tucked deep into a crevice of the cave. He used dry sage and greasewood roots, fuel that burned hot and almost smokeless. Clara Hart sat huddled against the stone wall, her arms wrapped tightly around her shins. The wet cotton of her dress clung to her like a second, freezing skin. Her teeth chattered with a sound that seemed deafening in the stillness. She watched Kai as he moved, her green eyes wide and dark with a mixture of trauma and wary calculation. She had read the dime novels. She had heard the whispers in the parlors of St. Louis and the hushed warnings at the trading post. They spoke of the savage nature of the Apache and the Navajo, of men who took what they wanted and left only ruin. Kai had saved her. Yes, but now they were alone in the dark, miles from the laws of men. The fear, irrational but primal, began to snake through her exhausted mind. Kai felt her gaze. He did not look at her directly. He knew the look of a frightened doe, and he knew that a direct stare was a predator's threat. He took a battered tin cup from his saddlebag, filled it from the spring, and set it near the fire to warm. Then he stepped back, retreating to the mouth of the cave to keep watch, putting the fire between them. "Drink," he said, his voice low, blending with the wind outside. "The water is life." Clara reached for the cup with trembling hands. The metal was warm, shocking against her frozen fingers. She sipped, the heat spreading through her chest. But the shivering did not stop. It racked her body in violent spasms. Kai turned back, his brow furrowed. He saw the way the wet fabric sucked the heat from her. Hypothermia was a quieter killer than a bullet, but it was just as final. "You must remove the wet clothes," he stated flatly. It was not a request. It was a medical necessity. Clara stiffened. She pulled the sodden collar of her dress tighter. I cannot. You will die if you do not," Kai said. He did not move closer. He unbuttoned his heavy sheepskin-lined canvas coat dry on the inside. As the leather had shed the river water and laid it on a flat stone near the fire. It was a massive garment, large enough to blanket her completely. "I will turn my back," Kai said. "I will watch the trail. Put on the coat. Hang your dress by the heat." Clara looked at the coat, then at the man standing silhouetted against the stars. He was a warrior, a man of violence by necessity. Yet he stood with his hands open, offering her space. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kai paused. "Why what? Why do you not—" She struggled with the words, the shame of her own suspicion burning her cheeks. "You could take anything you wanted. Out here, no one would know." Kai turned his head slightly, his profile sharp against the moonlight. "I do not take— Miss Hart, taking is the way of the men who burned your wagon. I am dying. We walk in beauty. Or we do not walk at all." He turned fully away, facing the abyss of the canyon. Clara stared at his broad back. The shivering was becoming uncontrollable now. Her vision was blurring. She realized he was right. Her modesty was a luxury she could no longer afford if she wished to live to testify. With fumbling, numb fingers, she unbuttoned the bodice of her dress. The wet fabric peeled away, heavy and cold. She stripped down to her skin, the night air assaulting her for a brief, terrifying second before she dove beneath the heavy shelter of Kai's coat. It smelled of wood smoke, horse and sage, a scent that was earthy and undeniably male. The sheepskin lining was rough but incredibly warm. She curled into a ball on the sandy floor, pulling the collar up to her nose, the hem covering her feet. "I am covered," she said softly. Kai turned. He did not look at her body, hidden beneath the folds of his coat. He looked only at her face, which was pale and etched with exhaustion. He moved to the fire, picking up her wet clothes and draping them over the rocks near the heat, but not so close as to scorch. Then he knelt by the fire. He took a small pouch from his belt and emptied a bit of fine charcoal dust onto a flat stone. He added a drop of bear grease from a small vial and began to mix it with his finger, creating a thick, black paste. Clara watched him, mesmerized. "What are you doing?" "The cold has gone deep," Kai said. "It sits in the spirit. Medicine is needed." He moved closer to her. Clara flinched, instinctively pulling her arm back under the coat. "I am not a possession," she blurted out. The words came from a deep, fractured place inside her. "I am 24 years old, and I have never been with a man, not because I am saving myself for a husband, but because I have seen what marriage does to women in my city. They become property. They lose their names. They lose their voices." She was crying now, the tears hot and fast. "I came west to be free, to be Clara Hart, not someone's wife, not someone's victim. And now I am just a thing to be hunted." Kai listened. He did not interrupt. He waited until her words ran dry, leaving only the sound of the wind and the crackle of the fire. He sat back on his heels, his expression unreadable but soft. "You think you are a thing because that is what they wrote on the wood. Navajo lover. They try to shame you with my name. They try to make you small." He dipped his finger into the black paste. "Give me your hand. Clara." It was the first time he had used her given name without the title. It sounded different in his voice, grounded, respectful, slowly, hesitantly. Clara extended her arm from beneath the coat. Her wrist was slender, pale, and trembling. Kai took her hand. His grip was firm but gentle, his skin warm against hers. He did not pull her. He supported her. "They use words to burn," Kai said. looking into her eyes. "So I will use words to heal." He leaned forward. The firelight danced in his dark eyes. A faint smile touched his lips, not the predatory grin of Reddick, nor the arrogant smirk of Crow. It was a smile of profound sadness and defiance. It was the smile of a man who had seen the worst of humanity and chosen to remain human. "Tonight," he whispered, "I will write love on skin." He lowered his finger to the inside of her wrist, where the blue veins pulsed with her lifeblood. The charcoal paste was warm. He moved with the precision of an artist, or a prayer maker. He drew a symbol, first a circle with 4 points, the Dine symbol for the world in balance. "Hozo," he murmured. "It means balance, beauty, harmony. It means that you are not a broken thing. You are the center of your own world." Then, below it, he wrote in English, the letters stark and bold against her pale skin, safe. He did not caress her. He did not let his touch linger in a way that asked for anything in return. He simply wrote the truth he wanted her to believe. "You are safe," he said. "Not because I own you, but because I see you." Clara looked down at her wrist. The black marks were stark against her skin. Hozo, safe. Something inside her, a tight knot of terror that had been coiled in her chest since the wagon tipped over, began to loosen. She looked at Kai, really looked at him. She saw the lines of fatigue around his eyes, the dust in his hair, the quiet strength in his hands. For the first time in her life, a man was touching her not to take, but to give. He was returning her dignity to her, piece by piece. "Thank you," she choked out. Kai wiped his hand on the rag. "Sleep now. I will watch the dark." He moved back to the cave entrance, wrapping himself in a woolen blanket from his saddlebag, leaving her the fortress of his coat. Clara lay back, clutching her wrist to her chest. She traced the drying letters with her thumb. The heat from the coat and the fire began to lull her, but it was the word on her skin that finally allowed her eyes to close. The morning came too soon, bleeding a pale, sickly light into the canyon. Kai was already awake, standing at the edge of the ledge, peering through a pair of battered field glasses. Clara stirred. Her body ached as if she had been beaten, but the feverish chill was gone. She sat up, pulling the coat around her. Her dress, hanging by the fire, was dry and stiff with salt and dust. "Do not stand up," Kai commanded without turning. "Movement catches the eye." Clara crawled to his side, keeping low. "What is it?" "Look," he said, handing her the glasses and pointing toward the canyon floor to the east. She raised the lenses. At first, she saw only rock and scrub. Then, she saw it, 3 distinct lines in the sand, cutting across the natural ripple of the wind. Wagon wheels, but not a wagon, a buckboard. Light and fast, and beside it, the prints of shod horses. "They are backtracking," Kai said grimly. "Reddick is not just following the trail. He is anticipating it. He knows we did not cross the river for good. He is circling the high ground." "They are so close," Clara whispered. The fear returned, cold and sharp. "Close enough to see smoke if we are careless." Kai said, "Close enough to hear a gunshot." He took the glasses back. "We must slow them down. If they reach the upper ridge before noon, they will cut us off from the pass." "How?" Clara asked. "We have 1 rifle. They have a posse. We do not fight with bullets today." Kai said, "We fight with doubt." He moved to his saddlebags and pulled out a coil of thin fishing line and several empty tin cans that had once held peaches. He picked up a handful of dry pebbles. "Reddick is a bully," Kai explained as he worked, punching holes in the cans with his knife. "Bullies are brave when they are chasing a victim. They are cautious when they think the victim has teeth." He led her to a narrow choke point on the trail leading up to their cave, a spot where the path twisted between 2 massive boulders. "We will set a tripwire," Kai said, "not to kill. If I injure a horse, the rider will stop to tend it or put it down. It buys us an hour. If I injure a man, they will become enraged and ride harder. But if I make noise, if I make them think they are walking into an ambush." He strung the cans across the path, hiding them in the brush, filling them with the pebbles. He tied the line taut at ankle height, dusting it with sand to make it invisible. "When the lead horse hits this," Kai said, "it will sound like the rattle of a diamondback, magnified by the cans. The horse will rear, the rider will fall or panic. They will stop to check for snakes. They will check for shooters. They will argue, and we will gain 3 miles. Clara watched him. "You know them well." "I know fear," Kai said. "It is the only thing Reddick respects." They returned to the cave to gather their meager belongings. Clara dressed quickly, the dry fabric rough against her skin. She rolled up the sleeve of her dress, checking the charcoal writing on her wrist. It was smudged but legible. Safe. She rolled the sleeve down, hiding it like a secret shield. She picked up the leather satchel. It felt heavier today. Inside lay the glass plate photograph, the evidence that could hang a deputy marshal and ruin a cattle baron. She looked at Kai, who was dousing the fire with sand, erasing all trace of their presence. "Kai," she said. He turned. Clara reached into the bag and pulled out the heavy wooden holder containing the glass plate. She held it out to him. "You should take this," she said. Her voice was steady, though her hands were not. "You can move faster without me. You can disappear into the rocks. Take the proof to Santa Fe, to the general, to anyone who will listen." Kai looked at the plate holder. He knew what she was saying. She was offering herself as the decoy. She was willing to lead the posse away so the truth could survive. "If I stay with you," Clara continued, "I slow you down. They want me. If they catch me, well, the evidence will be gone. But if you have it—" Kai stepped forward. He did not take the plate. Instead, he reached out and gently pushed her hand back, closing her fingers around the wood. "The plate is glass. Clara," he said, "it can break. It can be lost. It is just a thing." He looked into her eyes, his gaze fierce and unwavering. "You are the witness. You are the voice. Without you, the picture is just a shadow on glass. With you, it is a sword. But if we are caught—" "I do not intend to be caught," Kai said. He adjusted his hat, the shadow of the brim hiding his eyes. "And I do not trade lives. Not yours, not mine." He turned and checked the cinch on the mare. "If you die," Clara said, her voice trembling with the weight of her offer, "you must promise me. You must bring this to the light." Kai swung into the saddle and reached down a hand to her. His grip was iron. "No," he said, pulling her up behind him. "I will bring you to the light." He spurred the mare. They scrambled up the shale slope, away from the cave, away from the safety of the night, and into the blinding, dangerous brightness of the day. Behind them, far below, the first tin can rattled against the stone, a sharp, metallic warning that the game had begun in earnest. The descent from the high country was not a journey. It was an abrasion. The wind did not merely blow across the open scrublands. It carried the desert in its teeth, scouring skin and hope with equal indifference. To return to Red Mesa Trading Post was to walk back into the mouth of the wolf. But Kai Yazi knew there was no other choice. The glass plate in the leather satchel was useless as a stone unless it was made to speak, and the chemicals needed to give it a voice lived in Mrs. Lark's cellar. They moved through the landscape like ghosts. The wound on Clara Hart's forehead had begun to throb with a dull, sickening heat. The edges of the cut angry and red. The infection was a small, silent fire trying to take root, but she clamped her teeth together and kept moving. The pain was a tether, keeping her conscious when the heat threatened to pull her under. "You walk loud," Kai said. He did not look back at her, his eyes scanning the horizon where the heat haze made the twisted junipers dance like drowning men. "I am walking as best I can," Clara snapped, though her voice lacked its usual starch. Her ankle, wrapped tight in strips of denim, dragged slightly. Kai stopped. He turned and knelt in the dust. "Watch my feet. You strike with the heel. It sends a shock up the bone, and it leaves a crater in the sand that a blind tracker could feel. You must roll, outside edge to the ball of the foot, like the fox." Clara looked at him. She wanted to argue that she was a school teacher from St. Louis, not a fox, and that her boots were made for pavement, not this godforsaken grit. But she swallowed the retort. She looked at the vast, empty, terrifying space around them. Her books, her logic, her belief in the orderly nature of civilization, none of it applied here. Here, the only law was survival. "Show me," she said. For the next 4 miles, amidst the blinding glare of noon, the warrior taught the teacher. He taught her how to step on rocks so they did not click. He taught her to pause when the wind died, because sound carried farther in the stillness. He taught her that panic was a noise the desert heard before you even screamed. "When the fear comes," Kai said, seeing her chest heave as they crossed an exposed wash. "Do not push it down. If you push it down, it explodes. Breathe it in. Let it be a guest, then breathe it out." Clara closed her eyes. She felt the terror of Reddick, the pain in her head, the weight of the sky. She breathed in. She breathed out. She opened her eyes. The terror was still there, but it was no longer steering her feet. "I am ready," she said, and for the first time, she trusted her lungs more than she trusted a statute book. They reached the trading post after dark, approaching from the blind side near the dry creek bed. The building was dark, save for a single kerosene lamp burning in the back window, Mrs. Lark's signal, or perhaps just a lonely woman reading her Bible against the silence. They slipped through the cellar doors, the heavy wood groaning softly. The air inside was cool and smelled of potatoes, dry onions, and the sharp tang of developing fluid. Mrs. Lark was there within moments of their entry, descending the stairs with a shotgun in one hand and a lantern in the other. When she saw Kai, she lowered the weapon, her hand flying to her mouth. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "The whole territory is hunting you. They say you kidnapped her. They say you butchered the driver." "They say many things," Kai said, helping Clara to a crate where she could sit. "We need the dark room, Mrs. Lark, and we need fresh water." Mrs. Lark looked at Clara, seeing the blood-matted bandage and the fierce set of her jaw. The older woman's face hardened with a sudden resolve. "The water is in the pitcher. The chemicals are mixed. I will watch the door. If Crow comes, I will break a jar of pickles on the stairs. It will be loud." Inside the cramped closet that served as a dark room, the air was thick with the smell of ether and collodion. Clara's hands shook as she removed the glass plate from its holder. This was the moment. If the image was blurred, if the light had been wrong, if the chemicals had degraded in the heat, they were dead. Kai stood by the door, listening to the creak of the floorboards above, but his eyes were on Clara. She moved with a sudden, professional grace, her pain forgotten in the ritual of the process. She slid the plate into the developer tray. They waited. The red safety light cast long, bloody shadows on the walls. Slowly, like a memory rising from deep water, the image began to appear. First the high contrast of the sky, then the dark shape of the corral fence, and then the figures. Clara gasped. It was perfect. The focus was sharp. Deputy Marshal Clay Reddick stood by the wheel of the mail wagon, the very wagon that now lay at the bottom of the canyon. He was handing a canvas sack to a man whose face was obscured, but whose saddle blanket bore the distinct woven pattern of the Double C Ranch Silas Crow's brand. But more damning was the background. Behind the wagon, 2 men were clearly visible loading rifles. They were not Apache. They were white men, dressed in rough canvas. But one was holding a war club, a prop for the play they were about to stage. "It is all there," Clara whispered, watching the truth fix onto the glass. "Premeditation, conspiracy. It is a picture of a hanging," Kai said quietly, while the plate washed. Clara limped to the corner where Mrs. Lark kept the store's old ledgers. She had found the current one, but she needed the history. She dug through a stack of dust-covered books until she found the year 1883. She turned the pages frantically. "Here," she said, her finger tracing a line of ink. "November, legal fees, Coyote Flats magistrate, $500, paid by Silas Crow." She flipped forward. "January, consultation, Deputy Marshal Reddick, $200. "He bought the law," Kai said. "He did not just break it. He purchased it like a sack of flour. "This proves the motive," Clara said, her voice rising with excitement. "He pays the judge to ignore the land claims, pays Reddick to enforce the terror, and creates an Indian war to clear the territory for his cattle." The door at the top of the stairs opened. Not the pickle jar crash of Mrs. Lark, but the soft, rhythmic click of beads. Hatali Benali, the old singer, descended the stairs. He looked at Kai, his face a map of sorrow. "My nephew," the old man said softly. "The wind told me you were here." "Grandfather," Kai nodded respectfully. "You hold the white man's paper," Benali said, gesturing to the ledger. "And you hold the glass that steals souls. But do you know what they will do if you bring this to the light?" "They will see the truth," Clara said, stepping forward. Benali looked at her with eyes that had seen 80 years of broken treaties. "They will see a white woman corrupted by a savage. They will see a trading post that harbors traitors. If you show this, Silas Crow will not just arrest you. He will burn this building. He will burn the hogans of my people near the wash. He will say we rose up, and he will kill 100 of us for every one of him." "So we do nothing?" Clara demanded, her voice trembling. "We let him kill. We let him steal the land. We survive," Benali said. "Like the cactus, we endure. Take the girl to the mountains. Kai, hide her deep in the Canyon de Chelly. Let the white men fight over their papers. Do not bring the fire to our door." Kai looked at the old man, then at Clara. The conflict tore at him. He loved his people. He knew the cost of their blood. To run was to save them from immediate violence. "He is right," Kai said heavily. "If we go to the mountains, the heat dies down. You live." "Clara." "I do not want to just live," Clara cried, the sound echoing in the small cellar. "I am not a cactus. Kai, I am a witness. If I run, Silas wins. If I run, he finds the next wagon, the next family, and he kills them, and he blames you." "Silence is not survival. Benali." "Silence is how he reloads his gun." Kai looked at her. She was shaking, sweat beading on her lip, but her eyes were burning with a ferocity that matched any warrior he had ever known. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the gloom at the top of the stairs. A uniform. Blue wool. Kai's hand went to the knife at his belt. "Easy, Yazzie," a voice said. It was Lieutenant Mason. He walked down the stairs, his hands raised, empty of weapons. He looked tired, his young face lined with stress. "I did not tell them you were here," Mason said quietly. "I saw the tracks near the creek. Reddick missed them. He is a butcher, not a scout." "Are you here to arrest us?" "Lieutenant," Kai asked. His muscles coiled. "I'm here because I'm sick of burying people," Mason said. He looked at the drying photograph. He looked at the ledger Clara clutched to her chest. "I knew something was wrong. The reports, they never added up. But I had nothing, just rumors." "We have more than rumors," Clara said. Holding up the plate, Mason studied the image. He let out a long, slow breath. This is a court-martial. This is federal prison. If we can get it to a judge who is not bought," Kai said. "The circuit judge is in Coyote Flats tomorrow." Mason said, "Judge Miller. He is the brother of the driver who died in that wagon. Silas Crow does not own him. Crow thinks the regular magistrate is sitting, but Miller arrived an hour ago to cover the circuit. Coyote Flats is 20 miles, Kai said, through open country. I can set up a hearing, Mason said. A public inquiry, tomorrow at noon, in the town square. If you can get there, if you can put this on the table in front of the town. Reddick cannot stop it, not with the whole town watching, not with Judge Miller on the bench. And if we do not make it, Kai asked. Then the history books will say you were a murderer, Mason said. And Miss Hart was a tragic victim. Kai looked at Clara. It is a gauntlet. Reddick will be watching the road. Then we do not take the road, Clara said. We take the risk. They left an hour before dawn. Lieutenant Mason had ridden ahead to Coyote Flats to prepare the ground, promising to hold the square. Misses. Lark had packed them dried meat and fresh bandages. Hatali Benali had touched Kai's shoulder and said nothing, but he had given Clara a small pouch of corn pollen, a blessing for the journey. They rode double on the roan mare again, moving through the pre-dawn grayness. They stayed off the main trail, hugging the ridgeline that overlooked the valley floor. 10 miles out, the ambush came. It was not a wall of gunfire. It was a single, terrifying crack of a rifle from the rocks above. The bullet struck the stone inches from the mare's head, sending rock shards flying. The horse screamed and reared, spinning on the narrow trail. "Hold on!" Kai shouted. "Fighting the reins!" From the rocks above, a voice echoed. "End of the line, Yazzie." It was Reddick. He had not waited at the town. He had guessed the destination. Another shot rang out, kicking up dust at the mare's hooves. The horse bolted, not forward, but sideways, scrambling down a steep scree slope of loose shale. "Lean back!" Kai roared. They slid down the slope in a chaotic avalanche of noise and dust. The mare fought for footing, sliding on her haunches. Above them, Reddick appeared on the ridge, levering his Winchester. He was not alone. 2 other men were with him. They began to roll boulders. Great chunks of sandstone, dislodged by the men, came bounding down the slope, gathering speed. They were heavy enough to crush a horse, heavy enough to turn a human body to pulp. Kai saw a massive rock bouncing toward them, aimed straight for where the mare was struggling to right herself. He had a split second. He could pull his rifle. He had a clear shot at Reddick's silhouette against the sky. He could kill the man who hunted them, but if he took the shot, he would have to drop the reins. The mare would panic, and the rock would crush them. Kai made his choice. He holstered the rifle. He threw his weight violently to the left, grabbing the cheek strap of the bridle and forcing the mare's head down and around. "Hya!" The horse responded to his desperation, lunging forward into a gap between 2 boulders. The falling rock slammed into the space they had occupied a heartbeat before. The impact shook the ground, spraying them with gravel. They crashed through the brush at the bottom of the slope, the mare stumbling but finding her legs. They were in a narrow arroyo now, shielded from the ridge by an overhang. Kai checked the mare. She was blowing hard, bleeding from a scrape on her flank, but sound. He checked Clara. She was pale, clutching the satchel, her knuckles white. "You could have shot him," she gasped, looking up at the ridge where the dust was still settling. "You had the shot, and the rock would have killed you," Kai said. He swung back into the saddle, his chest heaving. "A dead enemy is no good to me if I am holding a dead woman." He looked at her, expecting to see the fragility he had seen in the cave, expecting her to beg to stop. Instead, Clara wiped the dust from her face. She reached out and took his hand. Her grip was not the clingy grasp of a victim. It was firm. It was the handshake of a partner. "We are still alive," she said, her voice fierce. "And we are still going to Coyote Flats." She squeezed his hand. "Drive, Kai, drive." Kai looked at their joined hands. The distance between the warrior and the schoolteacher had vanished. She was no longer just a burden to be carried. She was part of the fight. He nodded, a fierce pride burning in his chest. He turned the mare down the arroyo, toward the town, toward the judge, and toward the reckoning that awaited them at high noon. "We ride," he said, and they spurred into the rising sun. Coyote Flats was not a town built for justice. It was built for cattle, whiskey, and the quick exchange of silver for silence. The town square was little more than a patch of beaten earth surrounded by a livery stable, a saloon, and the half-finished timber frame of a church that had run out of funds 2 years prior. But on this day, beneath the relentless glare of the noon sun, it had become a courtroom. Lieutenant Mason had kept his word. A long table had been dragged out from the saloon and placed in the shade of a dusty oak tree. Behind it sat Judge Miller, a man with a face like a dried apple and eyes that held the hard, cold grief of a man who had just lost a brother. The driver of the mail wagon, Old Man Miller, had been his kin. That fact alone had brought the judge down from the circuit 2 days early. The crowd was a sweating, murmuring beast. Ranch hands from the Double C, men who took Silas Crow's coin, stood near the front. their hands resting casually near their holsters. Townspeople, women in bonnets and men in shop aprons, filled the back, drawn by the spectacle and the rumor that a white woman had turned traitor. Silas Crow sat in a high-backed chair to the right of the judge. He looked every inch the king of the county. He wore a suit of fine gray wool, despite the heat, and a silk cravat. He smoked a cigar, the blue smoke curling up around his face like a crown. Behind him, leaning against the tree trunk, stood Deputy Marshal Clay Reddick. Reddick did not look like a king. He looked like a coiled rattlesnake, his eyes darting, his hand twitching near the pearl handle of his colt. The crowd parted. A hush fell over the square, heavy and suffocating. Kai Yazzie and Clara Hart walked into the open space. They made a striking, scandalous pair. Kai walked tall, his denim coat dusted with the red earth of the canyon, his rifle held loosely in his left hand, barrel pointed at the ground. He did not look like a prisoner. He looked like a man who had walked through fire. Beside him, Clara limped slightly, her head bandaged with a strip of blue cloth, her dress torn and stiff with dried river water. But her chin was lifted high. She clutched the leather satchel to her chest as if it contained the crown jewels. "Order," Judge Miller said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmurs like a whip. "Lieutenant Mason has convened this hearing to present evidence regarding the death of my brother, Thomas Miller, and the attack on the United States mail." Silas Crow leaned forward, a benevolent smile on his face. "Your Honor, with respect, is this necessary? We know what happened. A war party hit the wagon. This man, this scout, took the girl. It is a tragedy, but the law is clear on renegades. The law is clear on evidence. Mr. Crow," Judge Miller said coldly, "and I will hear it. Step forward. Miss Hart." Clara moved to the table. Her legs trembled, but she locked her knees. She felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her eyes filled with judgment, lust, and hatred. She took a breath, remembering Kai's lesson. Breathe the fear in. Let it be a guest. "I'm not a renegade," Clara said, her voice clear and ringing. "And I was not kidnapped. I'm a school teacher. I came to this territory to bring education, not to be a pawn in a land grab." "A land grab," Crow chuckled, a low, dismissive sound that invited the crowd to laugh with him. "My dear young woman, the heat has addled your wits." Clara ignored him. She opened the satchel. Her hands were steady now. She pulled out the oilskin packet. "I have here the true ledger of the Red Mesa Trading Post," she announced. She placed the papers on the table before the judge. "These pages were removed from the book kept in the back office. They detail payments made over the last 6 months. Payments to the magistrate in Santa Fe. Payments to witnesses to disappear. And payments to Deputy Marshal Reddick for special enforcement services." Reddick stiffened against the tree. His hand dropped inches closer to his gun. Crow waved a hand. "Forgeries. Written by a hysterical woman who has spent too many nights in a savage's camp." "And the land deeds," Clara pressed on, pulling out another sheaf of papers. "These are the applications for the water rights along the San Juan. They are signed by men who have been dead for 5 years. Checked the graveyard records in St. Louis before I came west. I recognized the names." Judge Miller picked up the papers. He adjusted his spectacles. The silence in the square deepened. The rustle of paper was the only sound. "These are serious accusations," the judge said. "But paper can be written by anyone." "Then look at the ghost," Kai said. He stepped forward. He did not ask for permission. He moved with a quiet authority that unsettled the men in the front row. He placed the wooden plate holder on the table. "A photograph," Kai said, "taken by Miss Hart 2 days ago, before the wagon left the post." He slid the glass plate out. The sunlight hit the emulsion, making the negative image glow. "Look at the wheel," Kai said, pointing with a calloused finger. "That is the mail wagon. Look at the man standing beside it. That is Deputy Reddick. And look behind him. Those are not Dine warriors. Those are white men, men who ride for the Double C. They are holding Navajo lances, but they are wearing cowboy boots." The judge leaned in. He picked up a magnifying glass from his desk kit. He studied the image for a long time. The crowd pressed closer, straining to see. "It is a trick of the light," Reddick snarled, pushing himself off the tree. "Shadows and dust." "I know tracks," Kai said, turning to face the crowd. He spoke not to the judge, but to the people, the shopkeepers, the blacksmith, the wives. "I scouted for the army for 3 years. I know the difference between a moccasin and a boot wrapped in sackcloth. I stood in the canyon yesterday. I saw the tracks around the dead wagon. They were heavy. They dug deep at the heel. A dine hunter walks on the ball of his foot. He leaves the earth undisturbed. The men who killed Thomas Miller walked heavy because they were arrogant. They thought no one would look close enough to see the lie." He looked at Crow. "You built a fake war to steal real land, and you killed a good man to do it." Silas Crow stood up. The benevolence was gone. His face was purple with rage. "You take the word of a savage over a pillar of the community, over a deputy marshal. This man is a killer. He has likely bewitched the girl. Look at her, she stands there in rags, defending him. She is a Navajo lover. She has been used by him, and now she parrots his lies." The slur hung in the air like smoke. Navajo lover. It was a weapon designed to strip Clara of her credibility, to reduce her from a witness to a spoiled woman. "She is not bewitched," a voice said from the back of the crowd. The crowd turned. Mrs. Lark stood there. She was wearing her Sunday best, a black dress that she had not worn since her husband's funeral. She looked terrified, clutching her handbag with white knuckles, but she walked forward. "Mrs. Lark," the judge asked. "I kept the books." "Mrs. Lark said, her voice shaking but audible. "For 10 years, I kept the books at the post. I saw Mr. Crow come in. I saw him threaten the farmers. I saw him pay the deputy." She reached into her bag and pulled out a single, torn page. "I was afraid," she confessed, looking at the townspeople. "I was afraid he would burn me out. I was afraid I would end up like the Millers. So I stayed silent. I let him use my back room. But yesterday," she looked at Clara. "Yesterday, Miss Hart came to me. She was bleeding. She was hunted. And she was braver than I have been in 20 years. Mrs. Lark placed the page on the table. "This is a receipt, signed by Silas Crow, for 5 cases of rifles, the same rifles that your brother was shot with. Judge, I saw them loaded into the wagon that Reddick's men took." The crowd began to murmur. The mood was shifting. It was no longer a mob. It was a jury. Silas Crow looked at Mrs. Lark with pure venom. "You hag, I will ruin you. You are done ruining people," Clara said. Reddick saw the shift. He saw the judge's face harden into granite. He saw the ranch hands near the front take a step back, distancing themselves from a losing fight. He knew that the rope was no longer a metaphor. "Enough," Reddick screamed. He drew his gun. It was a fast draw, born of years of intimidation. He leveled the Colt at Kai's chest. "I will not be judged by a room full of cowards and traitors," Reddick yelled. "He dies. The Indian dies." The crowd screamed and scattered. Kai did not move. He did not reach for his rifle. He stood completely still, his eyes locked on Reddick. He knew that if he drew, Reddick would fire. And if Reddick fired, Clara might be hit. "Drop it! Clay!" Lieutenant Mason's voice rang out. The young officer stepped from the side, his service revolver drawn and leveled. But Reddick was past reason. His finger tightened on the trigger. "No!" Clara screamed. She stepped in front of Kai. It was a moment of pure, instinctive madness. She threw her body between the gun and the warrior. She raised her hands, not in surrender, but in a gesture to stop the violence. As she raised her hands, the loose sleeve of her dress slipped down. The sunlight caught the charcoal writing on her inner wrist. It was stark against her pale skin, the dine symbol for balance, and the word safe. Reddick froze. He stared at the writing. "Look!" he shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Look at her arm. He branded her. He marked her like cattle. She is his property. I am saving her." Clara did not lower her arm. She held it high. She looked at the judge. She looked at the women in the crowd who had whispered about her virtue. "He did not brand me. Clara said. Her voice was not loud, but in the terrified silence, it carried to every corner of the square. He wrote this because I was freezing and ashamed. He wrote this to remind me that I belonged to no one but myself. She looked at Reddick with pity. He wrote safe. He used his hands to heal me, while you used yours to kill. This is not a brand of ownership. Deputy, it is a mark of honor. I am alive because a man treated me like a human being. Can you say the same? The words struck Reddick harder than a bullet. The narrative he had built, the story of the savage and the victim, shattered against the simple dignity of the ink on her skin. Reddick's hand wavered. "Put it down, son," an old rancher in the front row said. It was a man who had lost a son in the Apache Wars, a man who hated Indians, but he stepped forward, placing his hand on the barrel of a shotgun. "The girl is speaking truth. We can all see it." Reddick looked around. He saw the faces of the town. They were not looking at him with fear anymore. They were looking at him with disgust. "Damn you all," Reddick whispered. He swung the gun toward Clara. Before he could fire, a blur of motion swept in from the left. It was not Kai. It was the blacksmith, a giant of a man, who swung a heavy hammer he had been holding. The blow struck Reddick's wrist with a sickening crunch. The Colt flew spinning into the dust. Reddick screamed and fell to his knees, cradling his shattered arm. Lieutenant Mason and 3 other men were on him in a second, pinning him to the ground. Silas Crow tried to run. He made a dash for his horse tied at the rail, but Kai was there. He did not run. He simply took 2 long strides and blocked the path. He did not raise a weapon. He just stood there, the embodiment of the land Crow had tried to steal. Crow stopped. He looked at the scout, then back at the judge. He straightened his jacket, trying to summon the shreds of his dignity. "I demand a lawyer," Crow said. "You will have one," Judge Miller said, standing up. "And then you will have a rope." The judge banged his gavel on the table. It sounded like a gunshot, but it was the sound of order returning to chaos. "Silas Crow, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and the murder of Thomas Miller. Deputy Reddick is under arrest for the same—" The crowd did not cheer. There was no jubilation. Instead, a heavy, profound silence descended on the square. It was the silence of people waking up from a long nightmare. They looked at Kai, the man they had been told was a monster. They looked at Clara, the woman they had been told was ruined. Clara stood by the table, her chest heaving. She pulled her sleeve down, covering the charcoal words. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Kai. He did not hug her. He did not claim her. He simply stood beside her, a solid, warm presence. "It is done," he said softly. "Is it?" Clara asked, looking at the hate that still burned in Silas Crow's eyes as the lieutenant handcuffed him. "The lie is dead," Kai said. "The truth has breath." He looked at the crowd. For the first time, they did not look away. The fear was gone, replaced by a tentative, awkward respect. They had seen the evidence, but more than that, they had seen a woman willing to die for a man, and a man willing to let her be strong. Judge Miller looked at the pair. "You are free to go, Mr. Yazzie, Miss Hart. The court thanks you." Kai nodded once. He turned to Clara. "Come, the air here is still stale." They walked out of the square together, passing through the parted crowd. No one spoke, no one spat. As they reached the edge of the town, where the desert began. "Mrs." Lark called out. "Clara!" Clara turned. "Mrs." Lark was weeping openly now. "Thank you," the older woman sobbed. Clara smiled, a tired, broken, beautiful smile. She raised her hand in farewell. They walked to where the roan mare was tied. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the red earth. The climax had passed. The explosion had happened. Now, they had to walk through the smoke. "Where do we go?" Clara asked as Kai checked the cinch. "Away from the town," Kai said. "But not to run, to rest." He helped her up. The adrenaline was fading, leaving them both shaking with the aftershocks of survival. But as they rode out toward the open horizon, the weight of the Navajo lover curse felt lighter. It was no longer a label of shame. It was a story of two people who had stood in the fire and refused to burn. The iron bars of the Coyote Flats jailhouse were thick, cold, and utterly permeable to the one thing Silas Crow still possessed in abundance: gold. Justice had spoken in the sunlit square, but vengeance whispered in the dark. Night had fallen over the territory, a heavy, moonless shroud that draped the high desert in obsidian. Kai Yazzie and Clara Hart had taken temporary refuge in the loft of the livery stable, waiting for the cover of deep night to move toward the safe lands. The town was quiet. The saloon doors shuttered, the excitement of the trial fading into an uneasy slumber. But the silence was a lie. It began with the smell of coal oil, sharp, chemical, and overwhelming. Then came the sound, a soft whoosh like the intake of a giant breath, followed by the roar of a beast waking up. "Wake up!" Kai hissed, his hand instantly clamping over Clara's mouth to stifle her gasp. Clara's eyes flew open. Through the gaps in the loft floorboards, an orange glow was already pulsing. The heat was rising fast, punching through the straw and dry timber. "They are burning the stable," Kai whispered, his voice calm but tight as a bowstring. "And the trading post. Look." Through the loft door, across the square, the Red Mesa trading post was already a pyre. Flames licked the night sky, consuming the ledger, the counter, and the walls that had heard too many secrets. "Mrs. Lark," Clara cried, scrambling up, ignoring the throb in her bandaged head. "She is safe," Kai said, pulling her toward the back ladder. "I saw her leave with the lieutenant before sunset. This is not about killing her. It is about erasing the evidence, and it is about killing us." Below them, voices shouted in the street. Rough, hired voices. "Navajo revenge," a man screamed, his voice theatrically loud. "The savages are burning the town. They are attacking." It was the oldest trick in the war manual. Burn your own assets, blame the enemy, and let the mob finish the job. Crow's men were manufacturing a massacre to justify a lynching. "We cannot go out the front," Kai said. The smoke was thickening, a choking gray curtain. "The back corral, now." They descended the ladder, the heat singing the hair on their arms. The horses in the stalls below were screaming, kicking at the wood. Kai paused. He could not leave them to burn. With a fluid motion, he kicked the latches of the stalls open as they ran past. "Go!" he shouted to the terrified animals. "Run!" The horses burst out into the alley, creating a chaotic stampede of hooves and dust. It was their cover. "Stay close to the flank of the roan," Kai commanded, grabbing Clara's hand. "Move with the herd." They slipped out into the alley, hidden amidst the panic of the animals. Gunshots rang out not at them, but into the air, fueling the narrative of an attack. They cleared the edge of the town, sprinting toward the open grassland, but the hired guns were professionals. They had set a perimeter. 3 riders emerged from the smoke, their silhouettes cut out against the burning buildings. They were not lawmen. They were the cleanup crew. "There!" one shouted, pointing a Winchester. "The scout and the girl cut them down." They were in the open. The fence line was 50 yards away, a barrier of barbed wire that Silas Crow had illegally strung to mark his future empire. "Get to the rocks," Kai shouted, shoving Clara toward a cluster of boulders near the wash. A bullet kicked up dirt inches from Clara's heel. She dove behind the granite slab, her chest heaving, the taste of ash in her mouth. Kai slid in beside her, leveling his rifle. He had 3 targets. He had a clear line of sight on the lead rider's chest. The old Kai, the scout who had survived the Apache Wars, would have dropped the man without a blink. It was clean. It was war. But he looked at Clara. He saw the charcoal smudge on her wrist, hidden beneath her sleeve. Safe. If he killed these men, he proved Crow right. He became the savage. He became the monster they needed him to be. Kai shifted his aim. He exhaled, finding the stillness between heartbeats. Crack! The lead rider's horse reared violently as the bullet severed the leather rein near the bit. The horse, uncontrolled and spooked by the fire, bucked, throwing the rider hard into the sagebrush. The second rider raised his pistol. Kai cycled the lever of his rifle. Crack! The bullet did not hit flesh. It struck the wooden stock of the man's rifle, shattering it in his hands. The man yelled, dropping the useless weapon and shaking his stung fingers. "I am not killing you," Kai's voice roared over the sound of the fire. "But I will take your legs if you follow." The third man hesitated. He looked at his fallen leader, then at the darkness where the invisible marksman waited. The fire behind them was roaring now, casting long, dancing shadows that made two people look like a regiment. "Flank them!" the fallen rider screamed from the brush. "Get around the rocks. They are moving right," Kai said to Clara. "We need to cross the wire. They will see us against the firelight," Clara said. She was coughing, her eyes streaming from the smoke, but her mind was clear. The teacher who believed in ink and paper was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that survival required action. She looked at the dry grass around them. It was waist-high, brittle as tinder. "They need a wall," Clara said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a box of lucifer matches she had taken from Mrs. Lark's cellar. "Clara," Kai asked. "Wind is blowing south," she said, striking a match on the rock. "Toward them." She dropped the match into the grass. The flame caught instantly, fed by the dry fuel and the draft from the town fire. A wall of orange erupted between them and the gunmen. The heat was intense, forcing the riders to pull back their horses. "Run!" Clara yelled. They turned and sprinted for the fence. The fire behind them roared, a chaotic shield of their own making. They reached the barbed wire. It was strung tight, 4 strands high. There was no gate. Kai threw his heavy coat over the top strand, pressing it down with his weight. "Climb over my back!" Clara scrambled up, using his shoulder as a step, vaulting over the sharp barbs. She landed hard on the other side, ripping the hem of her dress, but she was free. Kai vaulted after her, retrieving his coat. The leather was scratched, but whole. They ran into the darkness, leaving the town of Coyote Flats burning behind them. They ran until their lungs burned hotter than the fire, until the sounds of shouting faded into the vast, indifferent silence of the desert. For 2 days, nature tried to finish what Silas Crow had started. They moved into the Badlands, a labyrinth of twisted rock and alkali flats where the water was bitter and the sun was a hammer. They had no horses. The roan had been lost in the stampede at the stable. They walked. Clara's boots, fine leather made for city streets, began to disintegrate. Her feet blistered, then bled. Kai wrapped them in strips of cloth cut from his own shirt, binding them with yucca fibers. They had no canteen. They drank from muddy potholes left by the last rain, straining the water through Clara's handkerchief. "Drink," Kai would say, offering her the first sip, even when his own lips were cracked and bleeding. "We share," Clara would whisper, pushing the water back to him. On the 3rd night, they reached the high country. The air here was thin and cold, smelling of pine and juniper. They collapsed in a hollow beneath a twisted cedar tree. Clara was shivering, not from cold, but from exhaustion. "Did we win, Kai?" she asked, her voice raspy. "We ran away. The town burned. Did we win anything?" Kai looked at the stars. "We are breathing. That is a victory." A sound in the darkness made him reach for his knife, a soft, rhythmic chanting. It was not an enemy. Hatali Benali emerged from the shadows of the trees. He was not alone. Behind him were 3 other men sheep-herders, men who lived in the high silence. They carried blankets, a water skin, and a pouch of dried mutton. "The smoke travels far," Benali said, sitting down across from them. He offered the water skin to Clara. "But the story travels faster." "Tell us," Kai said. "The Lieutenant Mason is a stubborn man," Benali said, a twinkle in his ancient eyes. "He arrested Crow before the fire reached the jail. He put him in a wagon and drove him to Santa Fe himself, under guard of the 10th Cavalry who were patrolling the road. Crow is in a federal cell now. The fire, it burned the trading post. Yes, but it did not burn the truth." "And Reddick?" Clara asked. "He has no badge," Benali said. "He rides south, toward Mexico. A man with one hand cannot hold a town." The relief that washed over Clara was so profound she almost wept. But Benali raised a hand. Do not think the wolf is dead because he is caged, the old man warned. Crow has friends. Money has long roots. You cannot go back to Reddick's town. And you cannot go back to the trading post. It is ash. We have nowhere, Clara said softly. You have the land, one of the sheep herders said in Dine, which Kai translated. The land does not judge. They stayed with the herders for a week, healing. The community did not fight a war for them. They did something more profound. They absorbed them. They hid them in the folds of the landscape, covering their tracks with sheep trails, feeding them with the quiet generosity of people who knew what it was to be hunted. On the 7th day, Clara stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. The air was crisp, signaling the turning of the season. The aspen trees were beginning to quake with gold. Kai walked up behind her. He had washed the dust from his hair, but the lines around his eyes remained. He looked at her, at the woman who had walked through hell in a torn blue dress. The stagecoach road is 20 miles north, Kai said. Lieutenant Mason sent word. He can ensure you safe passage to the railhead. You can be in St. Louis in 5 days. Clara looked at the distant line of the road. She thought of St. Louis. She thought of the paved streets, the gas lamps, the libraries full of books that smelled of safety. She thought of the tea parties where women spoke of nothing, and men spoke of business as if it were separate from morality. Is that what you want? Clara asked. For me to go. Kai looked down at his hands. I am a man with nothing. Clara, I have a rifle, a coat, and a name that makes half the territory hate me. In St. Louis, you can be a teacher. You can have a husband who does not sleep with one eye open. You can have peace. I had peace in St. Louis, Clara said. It felt like sleepwalking. She turned to face him. The wind caught her hair, which was no longer pinned up, but loose and wild. You are afraid, she said. Kai looked up, surprised. I have faced Apache lances. I have faced bear. I'm not afraid. You are, she insisted gently. You are afraid to love me, because you think that if you love something in this world, it will be taken from you. You think you are cursed. Kai was silent. She had read his soul as easily as she read her books. Every time I have opened my heart, Clara, I have buried what was inside, my parents, my brother, my faith in the army. If I let you in, and the world breaks you, it will break me. Clara stepped closer. She took his hand, the rough, calloused hand of a warrior, and placed it over her heart. Then do not own me, she said. Do not hold me so tight that you fear the loss. Just be with me. We choose this. Every day, we wake up and we choose to be here. That is not a curse. Kai, that is freedom. A love without possession? Kai asked, his thumb grazing her cheek. A love of equals, Clara answered. I do not need you to save me anymore. Kai, I saved myself at the fence. I need you to walk beside me. Kai looked at her, and the wall he had built around his heart for 10 years finally crumbled. It did not fall with a crash, but with a sigh, like a stone settling into the earth. I do not know how to live in a house, he admitted. I do not know how to be civilized. Clara smiled. I am done with civilized. I want real. She pointed to a distant slope, where the timberline met the sage. Benelli told me about a place, an old logger's cabin, abandoned. The roof leaks, and the door is gone. It is a ruin, Kai said, recognizing the spot. It is a beginning, Clara corrected. They rode there on 2 horses gifted by the sheep herders. The cabin was indeed a wreck. The logs were gray with age, and a colony of pack rats had claimed the corner. The wind whistled through the chinking, but it stood. It had a stone chimney that was solid. It had a view of the valley that stretched for 100 miles, a view where you could see a storm coming 3 days away. They stood before it as the sun went down, painting the sky in violent purples and soft golds. Kai walked to the doorframe. He ran his hand over the rough wood. He looked at Clara, who was already inspecting the soil near the entrance, planning a garden where nothing should grow. It will be a hard winter. Kai said, We have coats, Clara said, touching the sleeve of his denim jacket. There will be no law here. Kai said, "Only what we make. Then we will make it just." Clara replied. Kai smiled. It was the first time he had smiled without a shadow in his eyes since the day he met her. "Tonight," he said, echoing the words he had spoken in the cave, but with a new meaning. "Tonight, we do not write on skin. Tonight, we write on the earth." He stepped into the cabin and began to clear the debris. Clara followed him. They did not hide from the world anymore. They simply built a new one log, one stone, one day at a time. The falling action had ceased, the settling had begun, and in the silence of the high country, two people found the only thing that had ever mattered a place to stand. The aspens on the high ridge did not just change color, they caught fire with the season. One day they were green, trembling in the summer breeze, and the next they were a shocking, vibrant gold that stood stark against the deep indigo of the autumn sky. The wind had lost its bite and gained a crisp, wood smoke scent that promised winter was coming. But for now, the high country was suspended in a golden hour that seemed to last for weeks. At the cabin, the sound of the season was the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of a hammer. Kai straddled the ridgepole of the roof, his mouth full of the nails he had salvaged from the burned ruins of the trading post during a quiet midnight scavenger run. He was securing the last of the cedar shakes. The wood was rough, split by hand, but it was laid with a precision that would shed the heaviest snow. Below him, Clara Hart was no longer the woman in the torn silk dress. She wore a skirt made of heavy wool, hemmed high for working, and a man's flannel shirt that swallowed her frame. She was mixing mud and straw in a pit, creating chinking to seal the gaps between the gray logs. Her hands, once stained with ink, were now coated in the red earth of the territory. She looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun. "The north wall is finished. Kai, it will hold the heat." Kai looked down. He saw the smudge of mud on her cheek, the strength in her shoulders. "Good. The frost comes tonight. We will need the fire." It had been 3 months since the fire at Coyote Flats. 3 months since they had run through the barbed wire and into the wild. In that time, the world below had continued its noisy, violent turning. But up here, time moved differently. It moved at the speed of the seasons, not the speed of the telegraph. The cabin was no longer a ruin. It was a fortress of peace. They had divided the single large room with a heavy canvas curtain. One side was their living space, a bed frame Kai had built from pine, a stone hearth that drew well, and a table that had once been a crate. The other side was Clara's domain. It was the school. It was not a school authorized by the territory. There was no flag out front, no bell to ring. There were only 3 rough benches and a shelf stacked with books that smelled of smoke and survival. Mrs. Lark had sent them. She had entrusted them to Lieutenant Mason, who had ridden up the trail 2 weeks ago, ostensibly on patrol, but in reality, acting as a courier for the resistance. "Mrs. Lark says these were in the root cellar," Lieutenant Mason had said, handing over a heavy sack. "They survived the fire. She thought you might need them more than she does." He had looked around the cabin, noting the fresh chinking, the stack of firewood, the curing venison hanging from the eaves. He had looked at Kai, not as a scout to be commanded, but as a man who had carved out a life where none should exist. "The commission in Santa Fe is asking questions about squatters on public land," Mason had said, adjusting his hat. "I told them the sector is clear. I told them the land is too rough for settlement. It will take them 6 months to send a surveyor to prove me wrong." "6 months is a lifetime," Kai had replied, shaking the officer's hand. "Use it well," Mason had said. He had touched the brim of his hat to Clara. "Miss Hart, or is it Mrs. Yazzie now?" "It is Clara," she had answered simply. "We do not need titles to know who we are." Mason had smiled, a genuine expression that took 10 years off his tired face, and ridden back down the mountain. Now, the school had its students. They did not come in droves, and they did not pay tuition. They came like stray cats, wary and hungry. The first had been Jacob, a 19-year-old boy from a ranch near the border. His father had disowned him, beaten him, and thrown him out because Jacob had fallen in love with a Hopi girl and refused to leave her. They had arrived at the cabin shivering, holding hands, with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Clara did not ask for their marriage license. She asked if they knew how to read. When Jacob shook his head, looking at his boots in shame, Clara had pointed to the bench. "Then you sit there," she had said. "Kai will teach you how to build a snare for rabbits so you can feed your wife. I will teach you how to read a contract so no one can cheat you out of your wages when you find work." Then there was Sarah, a widow who had walked 20 miles with a black eye and a split lip, fleeing a second husband who drank his demons away and took his anger out on her flesh. She had found the cabin by rumor the safe place where the scout and the teacher lived, and there was little Ben, a Navajo orphan who herded sheep for his uncle in the valley. He would sneak away while the flock grazed, running 3 miles up the slope just to hear Clara read from a battered copy of Great Expectations. Clara wrote a letter that evening, sitting by the light of a tallow candle. It was addressed to the foundation in St. Louis, the board of directors who had sent her here to civilize the savage. "Dear gentlemen, you sent me to bring the light of the East to the darkness of the West. You gave me a camera to record the barbarism and a curriculum to erase the culture. I am writing to tell you that I have lost your camera, and I have burned your curriculum. The West does not need me to save it. It does not need your pity or your policies. What it needs is for us to stop lying about what we are doing here. We call it destiny, but it is theft. We call it law, but it is murder. I am teaching children to read, not so they can read the Bible to save their souls, but so they can read the treaties you break. I am teaching them that their voices matter, not because they speak English, but because they speak the truth. I will not be returning to St. Louis. My work is here, and for the first time, I am not afraid of the dark, because I have learned that the only true darkness is the one we carry in our own hearts when we refuse to see people as human. Sincerely, Clara Hart. She folded the letter. She knew she might never mail it. It might just sit in the box with the land deeds and the charcoal sketch Kai had made of her. But writing it was an act of exorcism. It severed the last cord that bound her to the woman she used to be. Kai came in from the cold, stamping the snow from his boots. The first flakes were falling, dusting the world in silence. He hung his heavy coat by the door, the same coat that had sheltered her nakedness in the canyon. It was worn now, patched with buckskin, but it held the shape of his shoulders. It was no longer just a garment. It was a symbol of the dignity he had wrapped around her when she had none. He walked to the table and placed a hand on her shoulder. His touch was warm, heavy, and grounding. "The ink is dry?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said, covering his hand with hers. "The words are done." "Then come," Kai said. "The fire is ready." They moved to the hearth. This was their ritual. In the evenings, when the students were gone or sleeping in the loft, the roles reversed. The teacher became the student. "Close your eyes," Kai said softly, sitting beside her on the rug. Clara obeyed. "Listen," Kai instructed. "Not to the fire. Listen past the fire. What do you hear?" "I hear the wind," Clara said. "What does the wind say?" "It says, it is coming from the north." Clara concentrated, furrowing her brow. "It is hitting the pines. It sounds sharp." "Good," Kai said, his voice a low rumble. "That is the snow wind. It has a whistle because the air is thin. Now, listen to the earth." "I hear nothing." "Listen deeper. The earth hums. It is the sound of roots tightening against the cold. It is the sound of the badger digging deeper. If you listen to the ground, you will know where to step so you do not break the crust. You will know where the water runs underground." Clara leaned into him. "You teach me to hear the invisible, and you teach me to see the visible." Kai countered. He picked up one of the maps Clara had drawn, a detailed topography of the canyon, marked with water sources, safe trails, and the boundaries of the cattle ranges. "Before," Kai said, tracing a line on the paper, "I saw this as just land. You showed me that on paper. It is a weapon. You showed me that if we mark the boundaries, if we file the claim in the way the white man understands, It becomes a shield. You turn this paper into a wall that Silas Crow could not cross. Paper is fragile, Clara whispered. So is skin, Kai said. He turned her face toward him. But both can hold a promise. The intimacy between them was not the frantic, desperate grasping of two people afraid to die. It was the slow, deliberate connection of two people who had fought to live. It was sexy in a way that made the dime novels seem childish. It was in the way Kai watched her read, his eyes dark with admiration. It was in the way Clara washed his hair, her fingers tracing the old scars on his scalp with reverence. He kissed her then. It was a kiss that tasted of coffee and wood smoke. It was not a kiss that demanded. It was a kiss that inquired. And Clara answered with her whole body. She pulled him closer, feeling the solid beat of his heart against her chest. There was laughter in the kiss, too, a small, breathless sound that escaped them both. It was the laughter of survivors who found the sheer fact of their existence to be a delightful absurdity. "We are alive," Clara whispered against his lips. "We are," Kai agreed. "And we are here." The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating a world transformed by white. The red earth was hidden, sleeping beneath the snow, preparing to be reborn in the spring. As they stood on the porch, drinking coffee from tin cups, a rider appeared at the bottom of the trail. It was not a threat. It was a messenger from the south. He brought news. Silas Crow had been sentenced to 20 years in the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth. The evidence of the rifles and the forged deeds had been irrefutable. Clay Reddick had been found drunk in a cantina in El Paso and shot in a dispute over a card game. But the most important news was not about the villains. It was about the name. "They are telling the story in the saloons in Santa Fe," the messenger said, accepting a biscuit from Clara. "But they do not tell it the way Crow wanted. They talk about the Navajo lover not as a curse, but as the woman who walked through fire. And they talk about the warrior who did not shoot. It has become a legend, a story about honor." Kai looked out over the valley, the slur that had been burned into the wood of the wagon. The words intended to shame them had been scrubbed clean by the truth. "He tried to write hate on us," Kai said quietly. But the ink did not hold. The messenger left, riding back down toward the world of noise. Kai and Clara remained. The day passed in the quiet work of living. They cleared the snow from the path. They fed the horses. They taught Jacob how to read the word liberty. They taught little Ben how to write his name. As evening approached, painting the snow in shades of violet and rose, they sat on the bench outside the door. The air was cold, but the heat from the cabin spilled out behind them. Clara leaned her head on Kai's shoulder. She felt the rough wool of his shirt and the solid muscle beneath. She looked at her wrist. The charcoal words had long since washed away, but she could still feel them there, branded into her soul. "Hozo, safe. Silas is gone," Clara said. "The threat is gone. We could go down. We could buy land in the valley. We could live in a real house with glass windows." Kai took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. He looked at the vast, wild expanse of the territory, the land of his ancestors, the land that had bled, the land that was now healing under the snow. "Do you want glass windows, Clara?" Clara thought about it. She thought of the way the light hit the dust motes in the cabin. She thought of the way the wind sang through the chinking. She thought of the people who came to this door because it was the only door that would open for them. "No," she said. "I want this. I want the truth." She looked up at him. "But what about tomorrow? When the snow melts? When the world changes again?" Kai looked at her. His face, once a mask of stoic silence, was open now. He had learned that silence was not a shield, but a wall, and he had torn it down to let her in. "Tomorrow is a ghost," Kai said. "It does not exist. All we have is the work we do today, the wood we chop, the child we teach, the love we choose." He squeezed her hand, a pressure that said, "I am here more clearly than any vow. We did not win because we were strong." "Clara," Kai said, his voice rough with emotion. There were only two of us. They had an army. They had the law. We won because we refused to be complicit. We won because when they told us to hate, we chose to heal. Clara smiled. Tears pricked her eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude. Then we have won everything, she said. Yes, Kai said. We have... He put his arm around her, pulling her close into the shelter of his side. They sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, watching the first stars ignite in the darkening sky. They were no longer the scout and the teacher, the savage and the virgin, the outcast and the traitor. They were just Kai and Clara, and in the vast, beautiful, terrifying silence of the American West. That was enough. What do we do now? Clara asked softly into the twilight. Kai smiled, the skin crinkling around his eyes. Now we go inside. It is time to make the fire. He stood up and held out his hand. She took it, together. They turned their backs on the dark and walked into the light of their home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the dust and blood of 1884, and I hope Kai and Clara's fight for truth touched something in you. If you enjoyed this tale of resilience and love, please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. I would love to know how far this story has traveled. Are you listening from a quiet room, a busy train, or maybe your own cabin in the woods? Please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, for more stories from the frontier. Hit that like button if you believe that truth is worth fighting for, and smash that hype button to help this story reach more people. Your support keeps the campfire burning. Thank you, and I will see you on the next trail.